Good afternoon. Wednesday, December 6th, 2023. Happy to welcome you to an episode of Broadband Breakfast Live Online. I'm Drew Clark, editor, publisher, and CEO of Breakfast Media, or Broadband Breakfast. If you are here for the Space Wars presentation, you'll have to wait 2 weeks, okay? A fortnight from now, we'll be coming back to that topic. We've had just a little bit of back and forth because we've been busy on our Broadband Breakfast's digital infrastructure investment, which happened yesterday. It was a lot of fun. We've done a couple stories, one or two stories on the event. We'll have several more available for free on broadbandbreakfast.com. And then for those who attended the event, either in person or live online through the webcast, we will make the videos available. And as we announced in our preview for this event, I will be going through talking about it a little bit. Happy to take questions about the event, but I'm going to kind of do my best in I don't know if I'll take a full hour, but do my best in 20, 30 minutes to kind of give a recap of the key topics for discussion and what to expect on them in our reporting, but also in the coming year, right? The key topics around digital infrastructure investment. So just stepping back a little bit, in fact, before I step back on digital infrastructure investment, I want to remind everyone that we are here every Wednesday for Broadband Breakfast Live Online. This is one of our signature events. This is our free event that we host and intend to continue hosting every Wednesday going forward into the new year. We've been doing this since the pandemic hit on March 13th, 2020, or at least the day the pandemic seemed to hit the world and everything closed down and we actually started on a Friday, even though we're now on Wednesday, just to kind of make sense of how we connect, how we interact, how we communicate in a world where we couldn't, right? I mean, remember that was like. So we've done 200 of these events, nearly 200 coming up on that since the pandemic started, and we've covered a range of topics, really the whole panoply of subjects that we at Broadband Breakfast cover, which includes broadband's infrastructure, broadband's impact, and big tech, and some of the policy issues surrounding big tech, including social media, AI, privacy, net neutrality, and so forth. We've got some good events coming up. We're going to be publicizing more in the next few weeks now that we've got digital infrastructure investment behind us. But just to kind of showcase, since we have had a few quick transitions today, again, we're going to recap yesterday's summit. That's what I'll spend the bulk of our time on. Very open to taking your questions on the Q&A bar. That's where we recommend you do that. That way people can vote them up, vote them down, have access to those. Next Wednesday, the 13th, we're going to talk about the Affordable Connectivity Fund at year's end. I'm really excited to welcome Lauren Gatos of the Glen Echo Group, Ryan Johnson of Next Century Cities, Sunny Wright McPeak of California Emerging Technology Fund, and Christine Parker of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Community Broadband Network Project. They're going to be on our program next week talking about the Affordable Connectivity Program. And then, as I said at the top of the hour, 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about space wars, what to expect from satellite broadband. And we perhaps haven't had as much on this topic over the past year. The year's been dominated more by fiber and wireless, but satellite is a important component in this mix, particularly in areas that are impossible to reach otherwise. I've had my own experiences. We'll talk more about that on the 20th when we're back. After a little back and forthing, we have decided we are going to do an event on December 27th. We know many of you will be on holidays. I may have a holiday day or two in there, but we're calling it an open mic for Broadband Breakfast readers. So whoever wants to be, come along at noon Eastern time that day as well. And then on the 3rd of January, we are going to talk about the year ahead, what to expect from broadband in 2024. So lots going on, and lots more to be announced soon. But for now, I wanted to just give you a taste of the things that are coming along in the coming weeks. So let's talk about digital infrastructure investment. So I didn't have a chance to kind of do a cross scan of who's here and who's was yesterday. So I don't know how many of you attended the live stream, registered for and attended. We are, as I said, going to make that available. And for those who want to get access to the programming, you can join the Broadband Breakfast Club for $99 a month and have access to all of our premium recordings and our special monthly reports that we produce as well. But let's talk about digital infrastructure investment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because that's probably just the easiest way to do that. So give me a moment. All right. So this was the event page. And again, this is the page where we'll post teasers to the videos when they're available, and they should be available today, tomorrow, and Friday. This is the 5th event we've done on this topic for basically 4 years in a row. We started right at the beginning of well, I guess I should say before the pandemic began, we were talking about this and we were building out this topic and this discussion. And then the pandemic changed a lot. It changed a lot. It changed discussion about the importance of symmetrical speeds, the importance of fiber, and our discussion, or I guess you should say the starting point for what we're trying to do here, is to bring the financial services community, the fund managers, institutional investors, private equity, venture capitalists. We probably really need to add, the government entities, because now they're playing an extremely important part in the digital infrastructure investment build out. But to bring that financial piece together with the operation piece, right? And speaking broadly, speaking about broader than just broadband, but the fiber, the small cell, the towers, the data center assets, right? Really trying to take that more comprehensive view. And so here, for example, is the program. Again, this is available to those who, well, actually, it's available for everyone here, but this is just the PDF of the program for the event that we had yesterday. And I'll probably just use this because it's a little more compact. So you can see here that we began with BEAD. We talked about investment in and beyond BEAD. And we had 2 state broadband officers and the chief investment officer from Connect Humanity on this panel. And it was moderated by Maria Curie of Axios. And the story for that is already on Broadband Breakfast. A little bit later, after I close my window, my share screen, I'll link to that in the chat window, but it is on the Broadband Breakfast page right now. And, you heard worries, you heard operational details. Louisiana has been first in the nation on many fronts on broadband, and they're proud of that. They have launched, they're one of 2 states that has launched their challenge process for the broadband serviceable locations, and they will be concluding that next month, 1 month from now and change. They'll be concluding that process. So they're ahead of everyone. Virginia is the other state that has launched that challenge process. And there are many others that are gearing up towards that. But by contrast, Maryland and Rick Gordon in the events spoke very deliberately about, we aren't out there taking the slings and arrows. We are doing more deliberately, and he talked more about some aspects of that. I must admit, maybe it's still a little hazy, but and I was preparing for the next session, but it was a good session, and there are many insights, and again, the video of this will be available for those who join our Broadband Breakfast Club. But what I guess I find most fascinating about this topic, and as we as we articulated it at the conference yesterday, is the way that BEAD leads to, or could potentially lead to, a range of other investments. And that's the next session that I had the privilege of moderating. This was on shared infrastructure and the future of vertical real estate. So what do we mean by that? Well, I mean, if we go back 5 years in time, the big buzzword, the big issue everyone was talking about was 5G, right? And small cells. And there's always been a bit of a paradox in this, right? Because while we all need wireless, right? I mean, here I am in a business, in an office, right? I'm at my laptop. The connection I have is a wireless connection to my laptop, right? But of course, it's hitting a fiber within 100 feet, if not quicker, right? And that's the way the world works, right? I mean, the wireless is the last, not even last mile, not even last 500 feet. I mean, it's the last 10 feet, right? And sometimes, very rarely, I don't really run into almost anyone who puts an Ethernet jack into their computer, right? Or we've got our devices. So there's always a wireless component to practically every broadband connection. The question is that a wireless component all the way back to a tower, or is it much more limited? So that said, we need these kinds of infrastructures, right? We need the small cell infrastructure. We need the distributed antenna system infrastructure to get higher and faster speeds. But I think the point that everyone really has recognized, and this is not rocket science, people accept this point now, that the wireless build out is going to follow a fiber build out, right? It's not taking place separate and apart from. And in this session, I was really happy we had some pretty good discussion about the evolution of the cellular tower industry. So Jonathan Adelstein, who has worn many hats and was the head of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service in the Obama administration. So he's definitely kind of got that rural experience, but now he's working as managing director and head of global public policy for Digital Bridge Investment, which kind of comes from and is in the wireless and the shared infrastructure space. And he talked about how for a time in, let's say, the 90s, right, when wireless got quite big because of the Balanced Budget Act of 1993, which was the bill that effectively brought auctions, right? There was cell phones before 1993, but it was in the Clinton administration. And with that bill in particular, that led to the auction process. And that's really what unlocked the great value in wireless. That was the beginning, because it enabled there to be, we won't call it property rights, but flexible use of wireless spectrum. That is what, in my opinion, kind of unlocked that value in the spectrum to be able to treat it as if it were property, right? And because of that, we started to see the development of a very strong cellular industry. And originally, those cellular carriers were thinking, well, towers are going to be a strategic advantage. Where can I put my towers and someone else can't? And maybe that held for 5 years, 10 years, but pretty soon the tower, the cellular companies realized that they did not want to be in that business of wireless infrastructure. And hence was born, the tower industry, the shared infrastructure. And almost all towers now are owned by an entity that treats them as shared infrastructure with multiple players on it. And so we kind of explored the concept of, well, is that a model for the future? Is that a model for, as we get to more advanced antenna systems, as we get to where we're talking about middle mile and last mile, or I should say middle mile and data center deployments, where does shared infrastructure fit in there? These were some of the things we talked about, okay? And again, watch for our reports of the events on Broadband Breakfast and for being able to sign up and watch the videos of that. I do see there's some points here in the chat and question, but since I'm focused on this, I'm going to kind of stick on this, and I'll come back to your questions here in a moment. The high point of the day for me was the keynote address by Mikael Philipsson, the CEO of Coos Systems. And he, in addition to being CEO of this software company, Goose Systems, was the key executive in one of the two major fiber building companies in Sweden. Okay. And so I had asked him to speak about the past and the future of open access, bringing this particular framework to light, that is to say, open access. And we've got a story on this that will be soon live on Broadband Breakfast about Mikael's remarks. But it was inspirational to me because Sweden was not a leader in broadband even 15 years ago, right? It was a decision that the country made to prioritize high capacity, gigabit, up and down. And it was the promotion of that goal by the Swedish government that led to what we have now in Sweden, which is 98% have fiber to the home at gigabit up, gigabit down availability, right? And that's by and large all open access, right? That is to say, what is open access? Open access is when you have an infrastructure provider, and then the infrastructure provider offers the pipe, and multiple internet service providers offer services on that. So a division of infrastructure and service. In the United States, we have had a lot of words for this, right? And Mikael's keynote was followed after lunch by a great discussion of open access, right? In a panel moderated by Chris Mitchell of Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Community Broadband Networks Initiative. And actually 4 experts, Scott Bradshaw of Sci-Fi Networks, president of Sci-Fi Networks, Robert Bridgham of Eastern Shore of Virginia Broadband Authority, Jeff Ryman of the Broadband Group, and Mikael Philipsson of KOOS also joined that panel. And so in that discussion, there were 4 different definitions of open access, 4 different approaches to how you should think about it. And so it was certainly, there's not a universal flavor, right? There's multiple flavors, right? And Mikael was able to give his perspective on this in the keynote, where he talked about many providers, 60 providers, internet service providers. And he talked about some very interesting things I did not know. For example, in Sweden, newspapers, right? Newspapers that had gotten battered there as here by changing modes of consumption of news, have become ISPs, right? They don't need to be involved in the capital deployment that telecoms traditionally are doing, but because they have a trusted connection with their readers in specific local geographies, have been able to rise to that opportunity of being ISPs. So that's just one teensy example of some of the evolutions and opportunities from changing business models that come from like a wholesale adoption of open access networks, which is what, again, Sweden has done. And again, Mikael had many other points that we'll be reporting on, and we'll be able to watch his keynote on Broadband Breakfast. But I think the takeaway for me, or one of the top takeaways, was setting that kind of goal really is significant, right? Really is very important. I've already previewed a couple of the themes in the open access panel, but maybe just to refine it a little bit more, on the one hand, on that panel, you have a fully private entity, Sci-Fi Networks, which is using private pension fund investment to build out and deploy their networks. They're of British origin, but they are very much a U.S. company, active in the U.S., building in many cities. Although they in previous years explored public-private partnerships or sort of more fully integrated models, they are now on the kind of private mold of private deployment of funds and private operations by Sci-Fi Networks. Now, universal access, though, that's a key part of what they, and I think everyone that I heard from in yesterday's discussion spoke about, is the importance when you're doing a deployment of making sure you get everyone in the community. So anyway, Scott and Sci-Fi Networks on one side of that private landscape, Robert Bridgham of Eastern Shore of Virginia Broadband Authority is on the other, fully public entity, a governmental entity. He talked about, I mean, becoming almost an accidental open access deployment in rural America. And again, it was spellbinding to hear this difference. And then Jeff Ryman, whose broadband group has sort of pioneered some very interesting public-private partnerships in Huntsville, Alabama, in Springfield, Missouri, and now, as I understand it, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I can't speak to the specifics of that at this moment, but Jeff certainly can, and he did yesterday. And it was, again, a really great discussion. And of course, Christopher Mitchell is extremely knowledgeable, not just about open access, but about municipal broadband overall. So that was sort of, again, a high point for me was this panel on open access and the significance that it could play. We didn't talk as much as we might have about Gigapower, a project that AT&T, together with BlackRock, the leading private equity company in the world, I guess at least America, has been partnering on. And we were really pleased to have Bill Hogue, the CEO of Gigapower, together with top officials from AT&T and BlackRock in one of our Broadband Breakfast Live Onlines just 3 months ago now, in September. That was a very exciting program. It's available, so go watch that. And that's sort of lurking in the background. We didn't, I guess I'm saying, directly address what things like Gigapower are saying to the deployment of open access models, but it was in the air. Okay, and then the last panel was one that I haven't had as much familiarity with. We haven't had as much familiarity with, but is really quite important. And it was about internet exchange points and the next step for data centers. So, just to set the stage here, I was familiar with what Connected Nation, a national nonprofit, has been doing with Hunter Newby, who is a data center guru, if you will, and together they have been pushing to get more internet exchange points in more states around the country. And this is, again, back to BEAD, right? BEAD is mostly last mile, but there's a middle mile component, right? There's a middle mile component to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And if individual last mile projects can have a logical connection to a middle mile network or a middle mile project, those can be included in BEAD projects. So I don't think we've seen the last of more middle mile. But the point of this discussion at our panel yesterday was really how important it is to have more internet exchange points as places where the broadband connections meet. This is vital to getting lower latency, to not having a slow lane on the highway, on the information superhighway, if you will. It quickly goes beyond my knowledge, but Peter Cohen of Microsoft moderated that session with a number of very deep people who are very deep into this field. So that's kind of the high level overview of the discussion points at yesterday's sessions. And as I said, we have and will have reports on all of these. And to watch the videos, just join the Broadband Breakfast Club. Now I've stopped sharing my screen. I appreciate all of you being here with us. I want to open it up to your questions. I do see some questions here, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the Q&A. Again, if you have a question, pop them in the Q&A and I'll get to them. I'll go as long as we have questions and we have people who want to talk about it. But I guess before I do, one last quick point. We are going to be doing another summit. Our next in-person summit will be here in Washington, D.C. We haven't even done the marketing material for this, but we'll be soon on February 8th. Okay, so that's Thursday, February 8th. It's going to be the Broadband Measurement Summit. So we're going to weigh in with this very important point about not just speed, but the health of broadband connections, and these labels, these nutrition labels that are really coming to bear and very important part. So that kind of returns to our broadband mapping roots. February 8th is the Broadband Measurement Summit. More to come on that. All right, so we got some questions here. Dan Smith, thank you for being a regular viewer and listener. Dan, the Hawaii legislature has appropriated matching funds for BEAD. A public entity could own the new infrastructure, middle and last mile. Any states creating public digital infrastructure, open access. All right, thanks. Let me take two angles on this. The first is it's important to highlight there's a difference between open access middle mile and open access last mile. And again, notwithstanding what I said about the porousness of the term open access, the basic idea is there's some sharing of the network assets and infrastructure. And that's, when we're talking about undersea cables, or when we're talking about, backbone, there's complete sharing, right? I mean, that's the whole point, is there's sharing of multiple entities making use of those networks. And that's also very largely the case in middle mile networks as well. So basically all middle mile networks have some degree of open access. Now there's obviously commercial discussions, commercial terms. It's not free. Open does not mean free. Open access in the case of middle mile just means that you can lease space capacity on such a network. So that's, I guess, the first point I would make. It's the last mile networks that are not open access for the most part in the United States, which is why this is such an important topic to raise and discuss when we're talking about last mile. But so that's just kind of the caveat. Now, there are many states in the United States that do have, our research and educational networks, R&E networks, right? That's a good example of middle mile networks that are frequently or predominantly open access. And now with the middle mile grants that were announced in June by the NTIA, again, I've made this point many times. I hope I'm not like just beating the same drum. They were able to use an incredible leverage of private capital. We basically calculated it as 93% match. So for every dollar that the federal government was spending on middle mile deployments, they were getting 93 cents from private investments through that match, right? And that's just, again, the power of leveraging additional funds. So through those grants, that $1.9 billion basically of federal dollars that were issued or were announced in June, some significant chunk of them, not necessarily half, maybe not even a third, but some still significant chunk went to public sector entities, right? Kansas is one, Nevada another. I don't have them in my head, all the others, but there are states that are building out or expanding on middle mile networks much more extensively. So I hope that addresses your question, Dan, on the role that states are playing and continue to play. And I think this ties into not only the open access discussion, but also the internet exchange point discussion that we discussed at Digital Infrastructure Investment yesterday. All right, we got another question here from Clayton Fennell. Thank you for being part of the event yesterday. I hope I addressed your question during the session. And I guess you are asking here, you asked a similar question yesterday at the summit, but would like to get your perspective. With initial BEAD proposals in, obviously the states have the initial proposals. There's volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1 is discussing their challenge process, and the other is discussing the procedures for the granting process. What is your forecast as to when last mile construction projects will begin to be awarded? In a recent speech, Gigi Sohn, the head of the American Association for Public Broadband, estimated another 16 months before construction projects are awarded and finalized, mentioning that, okay, here you got a number of points here. Number 1, NTIA will have a heavy lift to review and approve all the initial proposals. 2, the state broadband offices will have a heavy lift to finalize the rules for awarding grants. And 3, after the grant awards are announced, it will take months to negotiate contracts with grant winners. Well, this may be true. Now, I don't want to be such a Debbie Downer, because I do think that some states are moving very fast, like Louisiana, and I would be surprised if we did not see some deployments next year, perhaps even early next year, right? I outlined, for example, that the Louisiana challenge process will end next month, right? Yes, of course, there is this period of time of review and again, it's bureaucratic. It has gotten bureaucratic. But I mean, I think that 16-month window is a realistic estimate. I would probably amend that to say 6 to 16 months, or maybe even longer. 6 months to 18 months is the time period that we're looking at for when BEAD proposals for last mile construction will be out. Okay, now obviously politics seeps into this. Yes, you can certainly expect that we're going to have lots of pressure to get these out sooner from the Biden administration, and that's maybe even driving a little bit of my assessment that we are going to see some, but I don't think they will all take that long. Thank you for those questions, and thank you for being part of our discussions. Let's just see if there's someone in the chat window here. Again, we encourage you to put your comments in the Q&A or questions in the Q&A. Mark Goldstein says, my home is fully wired for Gbps, gigabits per second Ethernet, with some 18 outlets and router patching. I guess that's not a question, and forgive me for turning and assuming it's a question. If you got a question, put them in the question and answer. Janine Soki, I hope I got that right, says, she didn't put this publicly yet, so can you share some insight on the success or failure of government-owned last mile networks? Okay, well, sorry if I said your name. Look, I am a believer that municipalities should have all tools in their toolkit, right? Broadband Breakfast, we're a news organization. We don't, take positions on policies or public broadband issues. I mean, we're about better broadband, better lives. So we're not going to give a lot of time to people who say, oh yeah, we need less broadband and slower speeds, right? But that said, I mean, we're not going to take sides in this kind of religious holy war between fiber and wireless that sometimes rears its head. We see both sides of the net neutrality debate, right? I mean, I sometimes I feel a little split myself on that issue, but I grant there are sometimes some points that people make about government-owned networks. But I mean, first of all, I hate that term, right? Government-owned networks. What does it mean, government-owned networks, right? Here's where I'm coming from. To do a broadband network, you have to piece together a lot of different aspects. You have to piece together what sometimes we call the layer zero network, the rights of way, okay, the pole attachments, accessing that infrastructure. Now, it's true that like some wireless deployments don't need rights of way because you're going from a tower to a home somewhere, but even there, you got to get the tower somewhere. So there are inevitably rights of way questions on broadband deployments, and inevitably, who is the steward of the land on which those rights of way are deployed? It's the government. I mean, the government owns the roads, right? And some libertarian fantasies aside, right? I mean, privately owned roads. Again, I'm not even knocking privately owned roads. Like toll roads were incredibly important in promoting economic development, and they're privately owned roads, right? But at the end of the day, the private entity that gets the road has to get a concession from the government entity that owns the road, right? I mean, we go to railroads and the history of railroads and the interplay, someone call it corporatism, right? Where the railroads and the government have some kind of a bargain, right? The bottom line is government needs to have a role in those infrastructure. And because of that, they are going to have some say over the deployment of the broadband networks. And because of that, it makes sense to think about the public perspective on who should control or have a tolling capacity in those infrastructure. Now, the beauty, in my mind, of open access deployments is that you don't need to do it all or nothing, right? You don't need to say, oh, municipality, Chattanooga, you take everything. You get the rights of way, you build the network and operate the network, you offer the services on the network. In my mind, those can easily be three distinct functions where you have an infrastructure owner, you have a network operator, and you have a service provider. That's the vision of a three-tiered open access network, where you have a government role, inevitably again, in the infrastructure. Now, whether the government owns that asset, I'm just talking the asset. I'm not talking operating it or service provider capacity on it. But that's why in my perspective, there really needs to be some kind of a component for public discussion. So to the question of success or failure of such networks, well, they're all over the board, just like there's a success or failure of private networks, so-called private networks, right? And I mean, you want to look at a big failure, look at the CAF2, which we did a big report on not too long ago here in Broadband Breakfast. And 93% of the billions of CAF2 funds went to 10 megabit down, 1 megabit but laughed to even say it. I mean, it's just atrocious that billions and billions of dollars were spent on copper as late as 2021, as late as 2 years ago. Again, read about this in our piece on this, which I will put the link to pretty soon here. But I don't think it's fair to tar all deployments as being government-owned networks, and so I kind of think like overbuilding it's a term that is ill-suited to doing something beyond putting a pejorative out there. All right, Jeff Frankenfield has come forward with another question here. I continue to hear that BEAD Buy America, Build America, Buy America portion of the nationwide infrastructure build-outs only accounts for 20 to 30% of overall projects. The other 70 to 80 will be funded by private equity and therefore not necessarily requiring BEAD BABA compliance from vendors. Would I agree with this percentage? Well, I can't agree or disagree with that particular percentage, but I mean, it would not surprise me if that's the case. And I think this kind of speaks to what I was hinting at in what I said earlier about the match component that was in the middle mile deployments, right? 93% of the federal funds were so that's basically saying only half of those deployments just for those projects alone. And there's clearly investment going on that is not connected to BEAD or to IIJA deployment. So absolutely. Now, what does that mean for the BABA compliance? I think that we've seen some very significant progress on this front in this year, right? And I think credit is due to many entities, including Nokia, who's sponsor of Broadband Breakfast, which has been very significant player in developing a solution that does not run afoul of the Build America, Buy America rules, and does not at the same time, require every deployer of every project to say, okay, what equipment do I need in this deployment? Oh, what equipment do I need in that deployment? Because that's kind of where we have a problem, where it's just adding a layer of complexity and a layer of confusion that doesn't need to be there. So kind of embedded in Jeff's question is both the question of how much money is being invested outside of the government's federal broadband, and the other question is sort of, well, what does that mean for compliance with Build America, Buy America rules? And I hope I've addressed a little bit of your question, but there continues to be some questions. But again, there's been huge progress on this in the past year. Thanks for your questions. It's been fun to address your questions. We've used most of our time, about 60%. I'm not going to talk forever if there's no need to. I wanted to give each of you a taste of what we experienced yesterday. The stories will be on the website on Broadband Breakfast, and we invite you to subscribe to the Broadband Breakfast Club for only $99 a month and get access to all of our premium content, the reports that we produce, and each of the videos from the event. And for those who signed up to attend, you'll also, of course, get access to those as well. Don't miss our upcoming event, February 8th, on Broadband Measurement Summit. And of course, keep coming back every Wednesday at noon for these sessions, most of the time with other guests besides myself. Thanks for being here with us. Appreciate your questions, and have a great day. And we'll talk next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.